Good evening, friends. I'm back again with, I believe it's episode 9 of the Sanibel Chronicles. I want to thank those of you who are new subscribers to the channel. This whole program that I'm trying to put together is based on getting a sufficient number of subscribers to get my channel broadly based on YouTube with a larger number of viewers and of course likers. Likes are very important to the verification of a channel. Before I start tonight's episode, I had a comment from a gentleman wanting to know if let me read the question. Do you have any history about the development of the canals and Sanibel River as well as the Tarpon Bay Weir? So that's a good question. I thought that I would, beginning with the next episode, I'll start a 3-part series on the Sanibel Slough, the Sanibel River, and the mosquito control program on Sanibel. So you can look for that. And I've also decided, because the channel has not grown as quickly as I had hoped, that I would reduce the time that I spend on its production. And beginning next week, we'll be on a bi-weekly number of episodes. So I'll be publishing an episode every 2 weeks rather than the one like I started out. So tonight's presentation is the story of the Sanibel ferries. Many of you who are old enough can remember traveling back and forth to Sanibel and eventually reaching Captiva by the ferry between Punta Rassa and Sanibel. If you can remember those days, then I'm sure those are pleasant memories, because that 20-minute interlude of water travel was much less stressful than what it is today as you drive across the Sanibel Causeway, sometimes bumper to bumper, even if you're going to or coming from the barrier islands. When I first ventured onto Sanibel Island, it was back in 1952, I came across on a ferry boat. The second time I came to Sanibel was in 1956, and that time I traveled by government seaplane. Unless you were a good swimmer, those were the only ways you could get to the islands, either by ferry, private boat, or by aircraft. We did have an airport on Sanibel. It was located near the Casabel Resort. It was built in 1945, and the FAA closed it down in 1978 after a series of fatal accidents occurred on the either coming in or taking off from the 2,500 foot grass strip. So you would get there by boat or ferry, and the ferries were operated by Kinsey Brothers Steamer Line. They were a family-owned steamship company that got their start early in the 20th century. Two brothers became the Kinsey Brothers Steamer Line. And in about 1925 or so, a gentleman started a ferry from Punta Rassa to Sanibel, and that ferry landing was just to the west of Bailey's Store. This photograph is the first ferry that got started on Sanibel. It was built up in Pensacola and moved down to the islands to begin operation. It was called the Best. And then the next photograph is the Best operating out of the new ferry landing on eastern Sanibel in about 1930 or so. You can, if you know vintage vehicles, you can probably pick out the year this photograph was taken. When Bailey's store was on San Carlos Bay, about a couple of hundred yards to the west of where the causeway lands on Sanibel. In 1928, the Kinsey brothers purchased a large tract of land on eastern Sanibel, adjoining the Lighthouse Reservation, and they built a ferry landing on the bayside. And they moved the original ferry from the original ferry service to that. And as the business grew, they added another ferry. But before I get on to the ferries, I want to show a couple of photographs of the steamers that belong to the Kinsey brothers. The first is a postcard that was used to advertise their service, and the second one is the Gladys. That's the last steamer that the Kinsey brothers operated. In just before World War II, the remaining brother and his son Ernest Kinsey bought a large ferry. They named it the Islander, and it joined the best in the ferry operation at the new ferry landing. And this was a purchase they made pre-war. And then when World War II presented itself, that Islander was a sizable ferry, was conscripted into the military service, and it was moved to the port of New York, and it never came back to the islands to provide ferry service. Then in 1947, they bought a wooden ferry and named it the Islander, and this ferry was 65 feet long. As I said, it was a wooden ferry operated by diesel. They decided that because of Coast Guard regulations, any of their future ferries would be of this 65-foot size class, because a vessel less than 65 overall feet didn't have to comply with more rigid Coast Guard regulations on licensing. So that was their established length of a ferry. And then in 1952, they purchased their first steel ferry. It was named the Yankee Clipper, and it was put into service in 1952. This next image is a postcard ferry schedule giving the hours of operation, the cost per vehicle, the cost for the driver, and cost for the passengers and children, etc. This ferry schedule is from about 1950. The ferries only ran during daylight hours. If you needed a special ferry at night, it could be arranged, but it had to be arranged through a captain of the ferry. And I believe when I arrived on Sanibel permanently in 1958, a special ferry at night would cost $25. Some people hired ferries to participate in events in Fort Myers from time to time. It's interesting to note that at the peak of their operation, let's pick 1962 for example. They owned 4 ferries. 3 of these ferries could carry 9 vehicles, and the old best usually only carried 8. A small vehicle could be added as the 9th, but it wasn't routinely done. If a truck full of gasoline or LP gas was going over to Sanibel Captiva to be delivered to the gas station or to a restaurant that used LP gas, the ferry had to be a special 1-vehicle ferry. Passenger vehicles could not accompany flammable liquids or petroleum products. So that sort of skewed the passenger limit per day, each day. Now let's pick, like I said, 1962, and if all 4 ferries were operating, the first one leaving Punta Rassa at 7:30 in the morning, only about 360 vehicles could get over to Sanibel each day. 360 at peak season. And of course, the ferry schedule was not a round-trip ticket like the causeway was. You paid the same fees each way. If my family and I, when the kids were young, traveled to over to Sanibel, it would cost us round trip, my car, my wife and I, me being the driver, my wife being the passenger, it would cost $4 round trip. It wasn't that very, very cheap, the way money spread out back in those days. Next is a video that I shot, or we shot, of our family aboard one or more of the ferries. You can see the Islander is plying across the bay. I need to look at it again at the moment to see where it's headed for. It's either, there's one clip of the name of the Rebel, the last Sanibel ferry constructed, and then there's a shot of my wife Jean and I were holding our young daughter Leslie. This is a home movie that I shot, or we shot, in 1959. Today, the average use on the Sanibel Causeway is 8,100 cars per day. That's why if you're a first-time visitor to the islands, you don't leave the islands at the right time, then you're in trouble as far as getting off the island. And of course, it makes it very difficult for emergency vehicles. So that's the story on the ferry service to Sanibel. It closed down on May 26, 1963, the day the Sanibel, or the first, if you will, Sanibel Causeway opened to vehicles, and of course 24/7. So don't forget, I'm going to a bi-weekly schedule next week, beginning with the history of Sanibel's unique interior. I'll break it down into 3 parts on 2-week intervals. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe. It's very important if I'm going to continue producing and publishing these videos and keeping the ball rolling. My hopes are to tell stories and tales about old Sanibel, and that's where we're heading. Thank you very much. Please subscribe.